Hello and welcome to another episode of God-Sized Stories. We're very blessed to have Katie with us. Katie, tell us about yourself.
My name is Katie Anderson, and I have a husband named Jordan and 3 kids, and our family has been called to be missionaries to Indonesia.
I have had such a joy getting to know your family over the last couple of years. I was very blessed to have one of your children in my preschool class last year, which is how we met, which was so fun. And I'm so glad to get to know your guys' heart more, get to hear more about your mission and audience. We will also be blessed that over the next couple of weeks, we'll get to hear all about the plans that God has for their future in being missionaries and even some of the stories that He's already worked in their lives. So make sure you tune in over the next month, pretty much, as we have great stories about God's kingdom work. But for today, we're just going to get to know Katie a little bit more, and we're going to get the opportunity to hear her salvation testimony. So, Katie, I'm going to let you start on that journey wherever you would like, whatever you feel like is the most powerful place to start.
Well, thank you for having us. We really appreciate just being able to share. And one thing I want to share about our family is that we're just ordinary people. It's like I always was in church as a young college kid and saw missionaries as, wow, like that would be so cool to be them. Something I thought I would never be doing myself. Just to give you a little background of who I wasn't groomed or in the church. I came to know the Lord at the age of 21. The first time I stepped into a church, I was 18 years old. So we can back up to when I was a child. Like everyone, we don't get to choose what family we are born into. And as a 6-month-old baby, my dad was arrested and he was put in prison. And so my mom ended up having to work. She stopped being a stay-at-home mom and she had to work to provide for the family. And a little background on my father is that he had a marriage before and they had a baby. And it was a girl. She was heartbroken that her parents split up, and she was heartbroken that she didn't get to live with her dad anymore. Her name is Megan, and she just had this heart that I wanted to be with my dad, and she was always jealous of me, of being able to live with. And so it was this aspect where I was always living in the shadow of my sister. And my sister made some poor choices in her life that got her in trouble. And then their relationship between my father and my sister was also unknown to a lot of people. So I'm focusing on now me. I am this girl living in a family where there's already brokenness, division, hurt, and no God. My family is not believers. My family on my dad's side is more Italian, so you would figure we have a lot of Catholic more so in our background. But my dad, he didn't believe in going to church every Sunday. He went to church more to please his mom and dad. So that's how we were raised, is that, well, you go to church to please people. And so this concept of having a relationship with Christ, knowing the things I know now, was I didn't know that existed. So growing up, my father ended up getting house arrest, so he was a forced stay-at-home dad. I have an older brother who is 5 years older than me, and he was named after my dad. So he was the favorite child. He loved every part of what my dad did, and my brother just followed in my dad's footsteps when it came to sports and what he was involved in. And so my life had more to do with being the outsider, the one that, I was compared to my sister, my half-sister from my dad's first marriage. That's the person who I was always compared to, where don't do those things because you'll end up just like your sister, or, I hate it when you do that. You remind me of her. And so it's just this like shame and comparison. And I'm 5, 6 years old, just trying to like live life. And so I just was striving to be a people pleaser. I wanted my parents' affection. I wanted to show them that I was different. I was determined as a young child. But with alcohol abuse and addictions all throughout the home, of course there you would have the verbal, physical abuse as well that comes along with that. So it was just, well, once I get older and they would see that I'm different, then they'll believe. Then they'll believe me that I'm nothing like her. I vividly remember at 6 years old striving for that. So by age 14 is when I realize they're never going to change. My brother is graduated high school and he's away at college. And I thought that was the year that was going to be different. He's out and it's like, oh, now all the focus is on me. But yet all of their addictions and with drugs and alcohol just ramped up even more, especially with my father. My mom always worked really hard, but he gambled a lot of our money away. So he just kind of like forced us to be poor. And so there was this aspect of how he was living his life. And I was so depressed. I was so sad that I was like, how can anyone love me? I'm getting bullied and teased at school. I didn't have a normal social life. And my own family just couldn't stand the thought of me. And I was a good kid. I was doing really good in school, doing everything that you would be so proud for your child to be, that I just thought, I'm like, you know what? It's not worth it to live anymore. And without having Christ or without having hope, you just figure it's like, well, what's the point in living? And so at 14 years old, I took my own life. I took a whole bunch of pills and I was home alone. And I can tell you it didn't work, clearly.
Yes.
But the next morning when I woke up, I was devastated. And the first thought that came to my head was, death doesn't even want me. How? And so that was a very pivotal point in my life when I just was like, well, what's the point in being good? What's the point in pleasing people? It's like, there's no. And so that very day, I went to our local pool and met a friend. And her name was Haley. And I can tell you, my life changed. In that moment, I thought it changed for the better because she understood who I was. And she actually like cared for me. And she didn't care who my family was or what things like my father has done. She just liked me for me. And I love that and appreciate her very much in that season of life I was in. But her lifestyles was very different from what I ever wanted for myself. Being with gangs, drugs, hanging out with older people who you shouldn't be hanging out with at 14 years old. It led me into some really bad situations. And fast forward a year later, my parents decide to move because now I'm causing attention into the home. Police is now coming to the house and I'm getting in trouble, not going to school, skipping school. So now I'm getting attention, but it's not because I'm good, it's because I'm bad. And so, and I really didn't care that they were paying attention because I was trying to find my own life. I kind of already like X'd them out in my heart that it's like, I didn't care that they were upset. So we move away. One, to move me away from my friends that I had made. And then two, also, where we were living was really expensive. So we ended up moving north to on the border of Wisconsin and Illinois in Antioch is where we moved to. And at that point I thought, well, this is good for me. It's like, it was almost like I want to do good for me. And so as a sophomore in high school, I just was focused on doing well in school and wanting just to like quickly turn 18 so I can leave. And so I graduated early. I graduated in December of 2009, and I met my husband, Jordan, in January 10. Now, he was not following the Lord at that time, but when we met, we had mutual friends, and that's how we met. So the people that were at his house, I knew. So
Ah,
that's what drew me to his house when he invited me over. And I can tell you that that was the day that my life just started to change for the better. And he was finding his way back to the Lord. I did not necessarily know the Lord,
hmm.
but he was the first person on earth to actually show me like what I thought was genuine love, someone who actually cared about somebody. And I can tell you that his mom, his testimony and our testimony kind of intertwine a little bit.
Mhm.
But when he got really sick, he had a peace about him. My husband Jordan had his whole large intestine removed.
Whoa.
And before that surgery happened, I was really nervous. I didn't have the Lord, but I was hanging out with his mom a lot because Jordan was in and out of the hospital. And that's when we really started hanging out and bonding because I didn't have my mom and dad weren't together anymore. They separated and I was living on my own. And so it was during that time when I was hanging out with his mom and Jordan had a piece about him going into that surgery. And I'll never forget it because it was the first time I didn't know it, but I was seeing God work in and through him. And I was asking questions. How are you so calm? And he's like, well, let me pray for you. And I know so much about religion that it's like, well, typically when you're the one going through something, you're not praying for the
Right.
one on the outside. And so he prayed for me, and then he goes through the surgery, and yeah, he came out and everything was fine afterwards. And it really just got me questioning of like, wow, it's like who this is. Now, when a little bit before that moment, he was going back to the church and he was finding the Lord. And the church that we walked into, I don't know if you guys ever feel the feeling of when you just feel like true, genuine love is in a place.
Oh, yeah.
That's how I felt walking into a church. And I never experienced that before.
Hmm.
I remember this guy, he has passed away since, but I will always remember him. He was always known for being super genuine and always wanting to make everyone feel welcome in the church. And when you hugged him, his hugs were powerful. You felt something more than
Yes.
just a hug. It was like,
I love those people.
and from that time I was hooked and I was curious, but I never quite gave my heart to the Lord. But in the season when he was really sick and he was going through the surgery, I was really worried. And so my brain is slowly coming to know who the Lord is. It wasn't a fast progression, it was actually just really steady. He prayed for me right before going into his surgery, and then me and his mom were hanging out. And I remember his mom, she's the one who I'd be asking all these questions about Christ and what it means to have a relationship. And I remember one day in her kitchen, she had asked me, have you given your life to the Lord? And I'm thinking from a Catholic, people pleasing background, what thing have I done to make all of those things right? And I said, I don't know. I was like, maybe I have. And so she just laid hands on me and was praying for me. And that day, I gave my heart to the Lord.
Hmm.
And I remember going home, and I had a Bible at home at that point, and I'm sitting at my desk, and I felt like the Lord just flooded my previous life before my eyes. And he's like, I protected you from abuse. I protected you from the law. I protected you from all the gangs and the bad people that you were around. I protected it from you all because I love you.
Hmm.
And I'm so grateful that I have a relationship with you. And I remember crying. It's like, could you love me when I didn't even worship you?
Mm-hmm.
And so from that moment of being saved, I always had a missional heart that I wanted. How did me, living in a predominantly Christian nation, especially known to other countries,
Yeah.
slip through the cracks of not being Christian, or at least having the choice of knowing who Jesus is and what he has done for you? And so I always wanted my life to be someone else's shortcut every time that the the things that I have experienced and gone through have been hard. But what man meant for evil, God made it for good. And for that, I am very grateful. And it's very easy for me to become a missionary because that's what my life was all about. It was just sharing the gospel and making my life someone else's shortcut.
I really like what you said towards the end there too about the shortcut. I've not thought about that before, and now I'm gonna use that verbiage all the time because that's such a great idea that I've never thought about because it's true. Like we can be that hand that keeps people from going down some of the same paths we did, making some of the same mistakes that we did. That's the hope, obviously. Especially, I bet even more so, you guys as parents, like for your kids, even more so. What that is like, don't follow my mistakes, please, please, please. So it's such a wonderful thing to think about that we can be such a blessing to others, and I love that how much you recognize that God can just redeem and protect, like especially that thought that a lot of people don't think about of like he protects even non-believers, people that he knows someday. Well, he knows everything that's going to happen and has happened all at once, so he can be in that moment with you even before you believed, and you can recognize that his hand was over you, he was guiding you, he was protecting you, because it's such a hard concept, especially when we're at our low. Even while we are believers, I feel like even at our low, it's sometimes easy for us to turn our back and think, oh man, God's gone. But it's like, well, no, he's there. I just turned my back. He didn't get any further from me. And as you said, all the missionary stuff makes all the more sense now. Like your passion for people and like being the teacher in the past and seeing you interact with other parents, all that makes so much more sense now. And I feel like that's the importance of hearing other people's stories and hearing about what God has done in their life because you see them more rounded as a person and you have so much more love and respect for the passions in their life. So thank you for being vulnerable, being open, being willing to use what God has done in your life, and then not just say, okay, thanks, God, and just be like, I'm good now. Cool, thank you. I'm loved. Cool. And it's like, as you said, how did that happen? You live here in America where it's like Christianity is we are a Christian nation that, especially from the world perspective, like for sure. But I feel like that's the problem is we say that statement, but then we don't share the stories like that. That it's like, well, that's what that really means. It doesn't mean just going to church. It means loving on others. It means sacrificing of yourself, like you guys are gonna do. Like you're sacrificing of yourself. Like that's what a true Christian nation is gonna do: is sacrifice of ourselves for God to share this most important news that you have of Jesus as our Lord. Just like your mother-in-law did for you, is like asking those questions, being real with people. Like, do you believe this? Like, you have this. This power is yours, but we don't. So thank you for sharing that today with us. Thank you for sharing your heart with the world, because it's not just local. You're sharing with the world. Like your local is wherever you go, and it's going to be a lot of. I'm excited years from now to check in with you guys again and be like, oh, these are all the things. We can't even share all the things because there's too much stuff. I'm so looking forward to all of those great stories. And audience, as I said before, tune in over the next couple of weeks as you hear about the wonderful work that is coming and all the wonderful work that has already been done. They have such, the Anderson family has such a big heart for missions. And when you hear their plan, you're going to be motivated to do what you can in your community as they've done in whatever their community is in their season of life.
I do just also want to add a praise report to my testimony because my family not being believers, we did announce to them that we were missionaries. And I remember the first time that they heard these news, they were not happy. They thought we were foolish. And they thought we were irresponsible because we were bringing 3 young children over to a foreign country.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you now that my mom is now a believer.
Amen.
My father understands our calling,
Hmm.
and he is supportive in that. And also, people in my life who I grew up with also came to know the Lord, and the Lord rekindled those relationships
Amen.
on a godly standard. So, always, if I can just leave you with an encouragement, always share your story, because you never know who it might touch. And your story just ultimately glorifies God of the work that He's done in and through you. And no one can ever take that away.
We'll end there because that was such a profound statement. So, audience, thank you so much for listening. I couldn't do this without you. Goodbye.